Hello there and welcome. In this episode, we're going to continue working on the construction system or building system, whatever you want to call it. At this point, we can build different buildings. For now, we only have the command center, but we also limited the building to the amount of money that we have. So if we run out of money, we cannot build any buildings anymore. We need to gather more resources. Now, a few other things that we want to do in the building system is to have some dependencies between these buildings. Because like in many, especially classic RTS games, when you don't have one type of building, you cannot build a different type. So in our case, if we don't build the command center, we won't be able to continue and build other buildings, for example, the power plant. Now, some games start with the command center already built, and it means that we can start building other buildings. But in our case, we will have to build a command center first, and only when we build a command center, then the power plant will be unlocked. So we need to create dependencies for buildings and also for units, right? We cannot just build a unit if we don't have the relevant building for the unit, for example, a barracks. Now, the same way we have inside of our database, we can see the requirements. So we need some credits and we can have different requirements, for example, wood or gold and things like that. We also need build requirements. For example, we need this kind of building in our game in order to build this building. So that's something we want to do in this episode. Now, before we start implementing this, I created some kind of UI using AI because this doesn't look very good, and I'm also not an artist, so I cannot design it myself. So I just created some kind of simple UI. Again, it's not something professional. It's just something that I wanted to add to make the game look a bit better. And of course, in your game, you're going to have other UI, you're going to have a different style. So this is all just optional. This is just to show you how to add a different UI. So for now, we have this canvas over here, the UI. We have the side panel. And inside we have different categories and we have the entire layout of this UI. So I imported this kind of sprite over here, and all I want to do is replace this one. So we need to figure out where is the background. So if we go to the side panel, we can see that the red color is this thing over here. So I'm simply going to drag this thing into this slot, and I think it's not imported as a sprite, so let's import it as a sprite. And now I'm going to drag it inside, and we can see that it took this place. Let's also make it white so it will have its original color. And we can see now that it looks a bit better. Again, this is very, very basic. I didn't spend too much time on it. And over here, we have the buildings units. I also want to change these buttons to be these buttons, but we're going to do that a bit later. We can also move the amount of money a bit to the middle, so credits UI. Okay, we can give it a darker color, maybe a different font. Of course, you can download any font you want and import it into Unity. I also have a video about that. It's very simple. So we're going to use this default font. And now, and of course, these buttons are going to be over here, but I'm going to do it later. Now, besides this UI, I think that some of you may get some kind of null reference, and I don't know why I did not address it in the previous episode. So if you get a null reference when you run the game, let's see if it happens to me. Yes, I'm getting this null reference. It's just because of the way the code is structured. So we're going to fix this. So inside the by slot, if we go to line 53 and we go over here, because this is what the error tells us, right? 53. It means that we have a problem over here, but there's nothing at this line. It means that it's somewhere over here. And it probably happens because this onEnable is triggered before or after we actually need this method, this onChange subscription. So that's why we get this error, and it's a very simple fix. We simply cut it and we place it inside the start. and this fixes the problem. So now when we run the game, we are not going to see this error. Another thing I want to adjust is if we go to our slot area building. So this is a part of the UI. So inside the slot area building, we have this grid layout. And instead of using the upper center child alignment, I want to use upper left. Because if we remove one of these buildings, this one will go to the middle, and this is not the way it should look in an RTS game. So when we change it to upper left, it will always be over here. And then if we bring the power plant back, we should. So even if we disable this, it will stay over here. Otherwise, it's going to move to the middle. And this is just a small adjustment that I want to make. Okay, so make sure the child alignment is upper left. So now we want to start working on the build requirements, basically these dependencies between buildings. So if we open our episode 11 assets and the scripts, we can find this objects database scriptable object. And this is where we define our scriptable object. So first of all, we want to rename the requirements to be resource requirements because we're going to have another type of requirements. So we simply right click, rename, and we rename it to resource requirements. Now make sure that you rename it this way, because if you just rename it this way, it's going to rename it over here, but it's not going to rename it in the entire project. So of course, this is something basic to know, but if you don't know, then you need to do it this way. Otherwise, it's going to give you a lot of problems. So besides these resource requirements, we also want to have build requirements. So we're going to copy this and we're going to add build requirements. So we have resource requirements that we do use, and these build requirements we still don't use. But we don't want this to be of a build requirement type. I know it's a bit confusing. This is a build requirement because it uses resources, right? But the build requirements are going to be different buildings that we need to have in order to build a certain building. So if this is confusing for you, just find the name that is suitable for you. Maybe you can name this build requirement and this you can name build dependencies. So let's just rename this to build dependency. And as I told you, this is not going to be a build requirement. So it's going to be an enum of all the different types of buildings that we have. So over here, somewhere between these classes, we can create a public enum and we're going to name it building type. So we're going to have a none. So this will be like a default enum, command center, and power plant. Obviously, when we get new buildings, we need to add them over here. And now we can use this building type to be the list of types for this build dependency. So we're simply going to loop over these build dependencies and check what are the buildings that are required to build this object, okay? The same way we loop over the resource requirements. Now that we have this, we are going to enter our database script, and over here we can now see the build dependencies. So for the command center, we're going to add something, and we just want to make sure that everyone has at least one element. And in the command center, we are not going to have any dependency, right? Because we can build a command center without any prior buildings. So we're going to leave it at none. It means that it doesn't have any dependency, but still add this element. Don't leave it empty like this, okay? So it will still loop over this list. Now for the power plant, we do want to add a dependency. So we're going to expand this and we're going to add a dependency, which will be the command center. So we have to have a command center in order to build a power plant. Now, obviously, you can add more dependencies if you want to, right? So maybe a certain building needs to have different types of buildings. For example, some kind of nuclear weapon needs to have the command center, but it also needs to have a nuclear reactor, okay? Just an idea. So in this case, it's going to be the only dependency, and for the command center, it's going to be none. Obviously, when we add more buildings in the future, we're going to figure out what are the dependencies that they need. Now, although we did set these dependencies for the different buildings, we still did not identify the buildings to use this type. So we don't know what is a command center, right? We don't know that it's related to this prefab. So for this, we're going to have another field inside of our types. So inside, we're going to add another field. And we're going to name it this building type. And it's going to be of type building type. Okay? So this will be a single type, which will be this building that we build. So now we can save it. And each one will have a new field, this building type. So we're going to set the command center as command center and the power plant as power plant. So now each object will know what is its type, okay? So make a difference between the building type and the dependency of this building. Now, in order to be able to check if a certain building exists in order to allow a different building to be built, we need to have some kind of list of all the different buildings that we have, okay? So we're going to open our resource manager. And although this deals with resources, the building dependencies are also some kind of resource, right? Because our buildings are depending on these dependencies in order to build them. So it's also a nice place to put this logic. So over here, we're going to add public list of building types, all existing buildings. So these are all the existing building types that we have currently in the game. Okay, so once we build a command center, it's going to be added over here. And then we have a power plant, it's going to be added over here. So this way we can check what are the buildings that we own currently, and this will allow us to build other buildings if they have a dependency on them. Now for the actual logic, we're going to enter into our build slot. And over here, we're going to have another method. The same way we have this handle resources changed, we're going to have another method named handle building changed, okay? So every time we're going to build a new building or destroy a building, we're going to call this method. And this way we can know if this byte slot should be available, because if this is the power plant, then we want to know if we have a command center already. Okay, so we basically get the object data of our building, and we do this by using the ID, right? So if this is sitting on a power plant, then we're simply going to have the ID of the power plant, and then we can pass it into the database and get the power plant object. Then we simply loop over all the dependencies inside this object, and we check. If the dependency is none, it means that it has no dependencies. Just return and set this build slot to be active, right? Because we can build it because we don't have any dependency. But if we do have a dependency, check if this dependency is actually inside of this list that we created, right? Because this is false. It's going to be, I like to do it this way because it's much more readable. So if it doesn't contain the dependency, make it false. But if all of this will be skipped, then this will be called, and it means that this is available, right? Because even if one of these dependencies is not inside of this list, we want to set it to be false. And only if there is no dependency that is missing, then we're going to set it to be true. Now, we want to call this method each time there is a change in the buildings in our game. So each time we build a building or destroy a building or sell a building, and we're going to call it from the resource manager as well, because this is a singleton. As I told you, it deals with resources or requirements. So over here, the same way we have this on resource changed event, we're going to add another event, and this will be on buildings changed event. So in order to actually know if we have a new building, we need to have some kind of method that is going to deal with adding buildings into this list and removing them from this list. So we're going to create a method named update building changed, okay? And we are going to pass into it the building type, and also if it is a new building or not. Because maybe we just want to update and call this event without actually adding something new into the list. So if is new, then take this all existing buildings list and add the building type. Else, remove it. Okay, so I have this auto completion, but this is what we want to do. And after this is done, we want to invoke the event. So we're going to simply take this event and we're going to invoke it. After this is done. And then it's going to be invoked and it's going to check what are the buildings inside of this list. And this way we can know if the dependency is met. But now we still did not call this method and we still did not invoke this event. So we want to do it when we actually build a new building. And we do this inside our placement state script, inside the onAction method. And over here, if you remember, we decreased the resources after building the building. So somewhere over here, we can also add this line, build type this build type, database, objects data, selected objects ID, this building type. So we get the building type of the building that we want to build. So we already built this building, right? This happens when we built the building. And resource manager, update building changed, and we pass in the building type and we say that it's a new building, right? So this is the method we just created, and we pass inside the building type that we want to build, or that we actually built, because this happens when we actually place the building, and we say that it's a new building. So now when we place a new building, it's going to call this method, and this method is going to add this type into this list. It's going to invoke the event, and then when this event is invoked, inside of our by slot, we have a listener, right? Because we listen. Oh, right. We need to actually listen to this event. So inside the by slot over here in the start method, the same way we listen to this event, we're going to, let's actually move this over here. And now we're going to listen to the other event on buildings changed, and this time we're going to call the handle buildings changed. Okay, so just notice this is about the resources and this is about the buildings. And we're also going to call handle buildings changed once when we start the game because we want to update the list. Now that we have this, we also want to unsubscribe the same way we did over here. Handle buildings change on buildings changed. And now because it's subscribed to this event, it's going to call this method, right? So when this is called, this is invoked, this will be called, this method, and this method is going to take our item and it's going to loop over the dependencies. If there are no dependencies, it's just going to activate it, but then it's going to check if it contains all the dependencies, and if it is, it's going to simply activate it. Let's save everything. Now there is also one thing that we need to fix if we go to the database, because we played around with the different fields. If you go to the resource requirements, you may be missing this requirement, so just add this back. I don't know what you had, so credits, let's say 100, and then also resource requirement over here, let's say also 100. And this was removed because we changed and we played around with these fields over here inside the object itself. Because each time you rename it or you even delete it, then these fields are deleted from the actual scriptable object. So always pay attention to this. Now, there is something that might cause us a problem, and this is something that I may fix in the future, but at the moment, if our buy slot is going to be deactivated, it's going to stop listening to this event, and then it won't know to actually be activated again. So we need to remove the listener being unsubscribed in the disable, because this is not going to work with the buy slots, especially because the buy slots are getting disabled and enabled each time. So inside the buy slot script, although I told you to add this inside the onDisable, so we basically stop listening to the event on onDisable, we don't want this to be here, so let's just uncomment this, because once we start the game, it's going to run this method. It's going to see that we don't have a command center at the start of the game, and it's going to disable this entire buy slot, right? Because it's going to be the buy slot for the power plant. And then, because it's disabled, it's going to stop listening to this event. So then when we do build a command center, it won't even trigger this event because it stopped listening. So in this case, we don't want to add it over here. And anyway, this is just to prevent different situations when we destroy this item and then it still keeps listening, but our buy slot is never going to be destroyed. It's going to be disabled, but because it's a part of the UI, it's never going to be destroyed. So we don't even need to be afraid that this will happen. So we can even delete this entire thing. So don't worry. And of course, we don't want to do this on enable. We want to do this in the start. So now everything should work. And now if we click on the resource manager, we can see this list over here. We start the game. And in the beginning of the game, this will be hidden, right? The power plant will be hidden because we don't have the dependency. We can see the list is empty. But once we build the command center, it's going to be added into this list and we can see the power plant available. Now, of course, if we don't have money, it will still be available, but it simply won't be visible, won't be interactable. So now if we build another command center and we're only at 100 and then we build another one, then we don't have enough money and then both of them are going to be grayed out, but we still will be able to see them because we do have the dependency. Now at this point, we don't have a prefab for the power plant, so we're going to create it and it's rather simple. You already know how to do it. all we need to do is let's drag this into the scene so we see how it's set up, right? We have the command center, which is just an empty object, and inside we actually have the prefab, the model. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create, let's just close this. We're going to create a new object. We're going to name it power. Let's just duplicate this, Command D. Let's unpack it from being a prefab. Let's rename it to be power plant. Now, obviously, inside we don't want this command center, so we're going to find our imported assets. It was in European, I think, structures. So we have the command center, right? So instead of this one, we're going to find the power plant, this one, and we're going to drag it into the scene. Let's just drag it over here. Now we can see it's very big, and that's just because we changed the scale. So over here, if you remember, we changed the scale for the command center to be 0.12, right? So we're going to do the same thing for the power plant. We actually need to do it for the prefab. 0.12, let's apply. Let's move it over here. We can also add the material that we had for this one. So first of all, we're going to delete this and we're going to drag the power plant into the parent. Let's just make sure that this sits at 0.5, 0.5. So let's do the same thing over here, 0.5, 0.5. And we can rotate it if we want. Let's just see. It doesn't matter. So let's just keep it at this position. And remember, this is a local position, so you should just make it local to the parent. Let's see. Now we need to add this constructible script on the power plant, and we have it over here. And we can also change the actual model. I don't remember if we did something. Yes, nav mesh obstacle. So we had this nav mesh obstacle, but we already have it over here, I think. No, we don't have it, so let's add it. Nav mesh obstacle, and it's going to be disabled, and we're going to enable it when we actually place the item, right? The same way we did for this thing. So let's see, it's disabled, and we don't have any special layers. So everything should work the way it is right now. Of course, we also want to add the actual material. Let's just remove the command center. Let's add this material. We have this material that we created. Again, this is just the way it looks in my game. In your game, you can do whatever you want. Let's add this material. So we have this shiny looking power plant. Of course, we can also add animations and smoke and electricity, whatever you want. This is really about your game design. So now that we have this power plant, we can take this and we can make a prefab out of it. Let's just place it inside this prefabs folder. And now we have the power plant. Let's remove it from the scene. Oh, we also want to make sure that the prefab is actually in the middle, right? Let's remove it from the scene and make sure that it's zeroed on the position. And now we are going to add it into the database. So let's log the database and let's add the prefab into this power plant slot instead of the command center. So each building should have its own prefab. Now, if I did not miss anything, this should work. And now we cannot build a power plant, but we can build a command center, and now we can build a power plant. And for some reason it's not working. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's because we need to also set up the actual power plant. Bind system, database item 1, power plant. What is the difference? Oh yeah, we have the on-click. So on-click, we use the command center and we use the clicked on slot. So for the power plant, we need to do the same thing. Power plant, clicked on slot. Okay. Now let's start the game. And now we build the command center, we have the power plant, and now we can build the power plant as well. And now we can add more and more buildings, but at this point, these buildings don't really do much, right? They don't have any kind of functionality. So this is also something we're going to deal with. For example, the power plant is going to add power to our game. The same way it's working in Red Alert 2, for example. We need electricity for the different buildings. So the more power plant we have, the more electricity we're going to have. But this is going to happen in a later episode. For now, we want to finish with the basic construction system. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe. It will be very appreciated. And I'll see you next time.